Hello, Car Store here again. And depending on what you think of UV layout and UV mapping in particular, we've come to probably the worst or the best part of this series. We're going to unwrap the human head. This does allow me to show a few new features of UV layout though. Under the display menu, there's the X-ray option. And we can just move this slider along and it will reveal what's inside the mesh instead of keeping the surface opaque. So you can see here in this design, the eyeballs have eye sockets. Or sorry, that the eyes have eye sockets. We left the eyeball meshes in Lightwave. We did not bring them in to UV layout. We only have the body. And likewise, there is a mouth opening here so that if you were to animate and rig this character and open the lips, you'd be able to see inside the mouth. Otherwise, in most rendering programs, you'd see right through the back of her head since the polygon normals are facing outward. And like the eyeballs, we don't have the teeth or the tongue in here, so that's less for us to unwrap. But we do have to clear out these parts and flatten them as well. The ears are also a challenge traditionally with unwrapping, and we're not going to do much with these. We're going to leave some distortion with the ears and just accept that for what it is. So I'll set the X-ray back to here, and you can see I've turned on symmetry so we don't have to make quite as many cuts. One other feature here is the light. You can see that as you change this slider, it just adjusts where the light is coming from in the view here. So just a matter of personal preference. Everything else I tend to keep the same here, and I don't really play with this too much, but sometimes these two features are useful. So we'll start with the easy part, I guess, and that will be the eye. We'll get the eye socket cut out. Now I had to play with this a few times, so this video is going to go fairly quickly, but this actually represents several hours of experimenting and flattening work. And I found the best place to cut this is right at the edge of the eye itself. So I am going to do a Shift C on there and loop that around. And I get the other eye as well, which is quite nice. I originally was putting the seam further back so that you couldn't see it, but all these extra polygons in here for what is a very, very small body part just made the unwrapping go quite a bit more difficult. Pulling these out and including them in the eye socket area does make the unwrap a little bit neater. So we'll cut that and pull the eyes out. I also experimented with different ways to cut up this eye socket. And the main thing to keep in mind is you really shouldn't spend too much time on it. Again, normally there would be an eyeball mesh in here blocking the view from this. So getting this perfectly flat is not a major concern. But the route I chose to take was to split along the back. So all the way around to the front of the eye. And just check that it made it all the way. Yep. And then remove these edges from being cut. And we could go to about there if I recall correctly. So one more. And I keep moving the camera inside the head mesh. So let's pull this away a little further. And then a similar cut we can make along this half. And I believe it's this edge right here. Ah, did it again. And just make sure that goes all the way around. Looks like it does. And we can unmark a few of these edges. And that one. So we'll commit those cuts. We'll drop this mesh to the UV room. Now we also need to remove the mouth section here. So by my reference, I cut along here. And again, I was originally trying to move further back into the mouth with this cut, but some of the geometry right down here in the corner will be very hard to see, so we're going to get a lot of distortion in here, but it really shouldn't matter. But a lot of this geometry still made the unfolding a little bit difficult. So we'll take that out. And we'll make similar cuts to this mouth, I don't know what to call it, mouthpiece, mouth hole, whatever. We'll cut along the middle. And that should go all the way around. Looks like it does. Yep. This part of the mesh also has some pretty strange loops here. So if we were to, I'll quickly demonstrate this and Control Z it almost right away. If we were to actually pick this as the cut point, since it comes right to the corner of the mouth there. Okay, it actually stops here this time. In the past, a UV layout would sometimes actually bring the loop back around and bring it back to the front again along this edge here. But sometimes when it hits a point where it could go in two different directions, it will stop and allow the user to make the decision for it. So it really depends. So that's actually a pretty good cut then if it's not coming around to the front again. Yeah, we could even stop it there and unmark this section. Press enter to commit those cuts. Just check everything before dropping it. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So we'll drop that. And I'm going to go to the UV room really quick. Just quickly flatten these meshes since they're pretty straightforward. Do Shift F, bloat flatten. And that's good enough. Okay, we're getting a little kink in there. Nope, it's fixed it. Okay, that's good enough. This one's taking a little bit longer. It's good enough. We can fix it up later if we need to. So there's a bit of distortion on this, but since it's the inside of the mouth, and if we had the complete mesh, there'd be tongue and teeth in the way. So this is not something that you have to be overly concerned about. So let's return to the edit room. So that leaves us now with the ears And I also found cutting out the nostrils helped. Although I ended up welding them back into place later on, they just did help with the initial unfold. So with the ears, in my first attempt, I cut rather far out along here, and that added quite a bit of distortion to it. So what I ended up doing later on was bringing the cut in a lot closer to the earlobe. I believe it was this edge right here. So that goes around quite nicely. And again, we are still going to get quite a bit of distortion. Completely flattening an earlobe is very, very tricky. Especially this little section in here, the little piece that jets out a little bit. We're going to find that there's a lot of red distortion inside here. As these polygons are forced to be smaller than they are in the 3D mesh. But we'll drop the ear. And we'll quickly flatten that as well. You'll see what I mean about the distortion. Shift F to bloat flatten. And this section right in here is where the earlobe actually juts out a little bit. This is probably not going to go away. So we'll leave it at that. And Shift F on that. There we go. And that brings us to the rest. Now, one thing you want to avoid in the final product is any seams coming through the middle of the face. I'm actually going to put a seam in there and weld it back up later in the UV room. And that is going to be a very tedious process, but I found it was the cleanest way to get a really flat unwrap. The other thing that I did was actually split the head in half. Now keep in mind, in a model like this, we don't need a lot of detail back here. There's going to be a hair mesh, so any distortions and cut seams along here in the back of the head really aren't that important. So I made cuts along here and along here and along here. Let's see, it was this one here, I believe. So with the symmetry, that comes right around. And we cut that, and we can pull the entire back of the head off. And then come right down the middle of the face and cut that into two halves. And again, we're going to be welding this seam back together again. And we'll get the nostrils somewhere right about there. Enter. There we go. So drop, drop, and drop. So when you've dropped all the UV shells and there's nothing else left in the edit room, UV layout jumps you to the 3D room. So you can see the previously flattened shells here with their distortion maps. And here's the unflattened shell, so we still see the symmetry colors here, but you can see where we made our cuts. And we've already flattened the ears, so you can see the distortion there. But this room is going to be useful as we get closer to the end and completing this project. And we'll flip back and forth between the UV room and the 3D room quite a few times. It's really an excellent place to experiment with other cuts. One thing I did try, and I may or may not include it in this video, is looking at the back here. I ended up extending a cut along here and removing the cut along the top of her shoulders here. And it made for a little bit weird main body mesh, but I think it improved overall, and it allowed me to remove this middle seam here, since she might be wearing a dress or something. You might want to accentuate the top of the shoulders here and not have any cut seams there. So again, this just allows you to experiment a lot, and that's the great power of UV layout. Getting comfortable with the cut and the weld keys, you can make a lot of different changes and run different ideas to see how they flatten and keep coming back until you're perfectly happy. So let's start flattening. Well, the easy part is going to be the back of the head, so we'll get that out of the way. And so you can see how we're stretching along the top here, and so these are bigger polygons here than they are in real life. And this is where the experimentation comes in. You can consider adding a small cut seam there and running over that with the flattening brush, the B key. And you can see that it removes some of the distortion. But again, this is going to be covered by hair, so it may or may not be necessary. It all depends on what you want for your model. We'll flatten the nostrils down here as well. That'll be nice and fast. There we go. And now comes the really fun part. So you can imagine how difficult this would be with most 3D editing tools, although they come with UV layout tools, are just not quite as nice as this. You kind of get what you pay for. Pretty much everything worked out. So here's the unwrap. Let's see some of the details. So I mentioned there was going to be a lot of distortion in here. So you can see we've got polygons that are bigger than they should be and smaller than they should be. But again, this is right in the inside of the mouth, the edge of the lips. So it's not going to be a huge deal, but it's going to keep coming back every time we flatten this and clean it up further. As we weld this piece back together with the other half, we're going to keep getting that problem area back. And the same thing with the eyes. This is a really nice unwrap here for now, but as we smooth out the mesh and weld it back together, I found the eyes got pretty heavily distorted, and it was extremely difficult to keep them nice and clean. But let's start. We'll flatten the other half of the mesh here. Shift F. And just let that chug away for a few more seconds. Okay, that's probably about as good as we're going to get. So I'll press space to stop that. And we'll start the weld. just W. And then I'm going to press the M key to move it into position. And then just move it away again since it's obviously overlapping. We can't keep it there like that. And I'll weld this up to the bottom lip. It'd be really nice if UV Layout had a welding extension like Shift C for the cut tool. A little Shift W just to extend the weld as far as it can, but unfortunately it doesn't. So move into position, enter to commit the weld, and of course it's going to get very ugly and distorted in here. So the B key for the flattening brush, and these have gotten twisted up over each other, and they're not coming undone, so we're going to have to do this manually. I'm going to use the Control and Shift key to move the point, and Control and middle mouse click moves a single point. I did a video on this already, but Control Shift and a point moves a group and has a kind of a fall off to the move. So you can sort of adjust things this way, and I found that that is going to be used extensively in cleaning up the mesh on the rest of the face as we continue welding things together. But we can kind of pull this apart. And then just move that point by itself and get it off of this polygon. There we go. And now the flattening brush. Let's see if we can clean that up. There it goes. So I'm going to jump back to the 3D room just to show you how this looks. And it's good to sometimes check the work here. So you can see right at the edge of her neck, the polygons are too small. Just inside where her neck joins with her jaw, they're a little too large. And then coming around the curve of her chin, they're a little too small again. But this is going to be a case of just take it easy, step by step. Weld, adjust, weld some more, adjust some more. And here's where it's going to get ugly. If we commit the weld right now, we're going to stretch right across here. So one thing we can do is use the G key to mark the polygons. Okay, and this is going to loop up. I want to kind of keep going in a straight direction, more or less. That should do. Now if I do the double G, it will select this half, and this line acts as a stopping point. Now what we can do is these polygons here that are marked, we can rotate them. So the space bar and the left mouse button. So where you click with the left mouse button is a pivot point for rotating. So we can kind of rotate things. And of course you see the distortion adding in there. And space bar middle mouse button is for dragging. And so we can kind of drag everything closer. Now unfortunately it didn't do the same thing with this half here. So let's rotate and try to drag that a bit closer. And we'll commit this weld. Oh, that's interesting. That acted as a cut. I did not expect that. Control Z. Double shift. G to unmark. And now press enter to commit the weld. There we go. So obviously we got a lot of distortion in there. So the flattening brush, just move over all of that. And try to clean it up as best we can. And this is basically the process that I used. So as I said before at the beginning, it was quite tedious. And we'll just commit a few welds. And then clean that up. So you can kind of see how, since these polygons are bigger than they should be, they're sort of pulling in as we use the flattening brush and trying to reduce their size. And they're stretching on the polygons that are either properly sized or are too small. So it's a case of just massaging everything. And you can use the plus and the minus keys to change the size of your flattening brush, so you can influence a larger area. Weld a few more. And flatten again. And come back out. And do the same trick with the G key. Mark the polygons here. Just be careful to make sure that everything is closed. So if there's any polygon that's left open like this through this corner, when you do the double G to try to select everything else that's closed off, it'll end up selecting the entire mesh. So we'll just kind of come across here. Okay, I think that's got it. So double G, yep. And we'll rotate somewhere. Oh, now it's rotating everything. So let's Shift G along here, and we'll have two pieces. So rotate, move that in. Rotate, move that in. Double shift G. Continue welding. And flatten brush. So hopefully you get the idea at this point. I'm at the half-hour mark. So I am going to stop recording. I'm going to continue this process without recording, and I'll come back after I've welded a bit more. We'll see where things stand at that point. So I spent several minutes working on this a little bit further, and you can see the progress that I've made. I've finished up fixing the seam along the nose here. And I have to confess that this video recording is actually unwrapping and flattening out a lot more cleanly than my earlier offline experiments, so I'm quite pleased with this so far. You'll notice though that you shouldn't neglect using the flattening brush down in areas that you've already flattened. Notice how it's still tugging away here at these green areas because the red distortion is too small, so it's allowing that to stretch a little bit, and the blue distortion is too big, and that kind of allows everything to sort of flow in that direction as well. So don't just focus on where you're welding. Kind of allow things to just move the flattening brush over the entire mesh from time to time, and just sort of iron it all out and allow it to pull polygons and points into place. And then once you're not getting a lot more progress here, cleaning these areas up, weld some more. So this is pretty good. And every now and then I just zoom in and check on the eyes. They are still holding up very nicely. In my offline experiments, I got an awful lot of distortion in here, and the edges were wrapping over each other a lot. And I spent a lot of time constantly fixing that as I progressed. So I'm quite pleased that it's not doing it this time. And the nose is cleaned up fairly well. So this part is just between the nostrils and right where the nose comes out of the face. So again, it's probably not an area that you're going to focus on with your camera when you're actually rendering the mesh. So it might be okay to leave this distortion. And we're still overlapping each other here, and we'll fix that later on. Right now the overall mouth shape is staying quite nice, so I don't want to mess with that too much. A little bit more flattening in here. Okay, and we'll weld some more edges. And that is basically how it goes. Just continually Move the flattening brush over the mesh until the distortion is as minimized as possible. And when we don't get a lot of movement, we can either weld some more, or we can mark more polygons and do the rotate and translate trick to bring the pieces closer together. And that is actually probably the biggest difference in this recorded video versus my experiments, is I did not do this rotate and move trick quite as often. I focused on trying to weld as quickly as possible and continually clean up the weld with the flattening brush. And I suspect that's what caused all that extra distortion I was getting around the eyes. So this is actually a much, much better piece of work, I think. Double G, there we go. And I think we'll deselect those and try to rotate here. And move in a bit closer. Rotate there. About there. And move that in a bit closer. Double Shift G. And clean up the distortion. So I've noticed now that these cuts around the ears have become much, much more stretched. I'm just trying to think of how we can fix that. Possibly selecting this here and moving it up. I'm going to give that a try. So maybe down here, space and middle mouse button. Okay, that's not moving quite the way I expected it to. Now if we press the G key off here, we'll get the mark menu. And the equal sign and the minus sign will grow and shrink the selection. So I'm going to press equals here. Move that up. Oops, about there. No. Okay, we'll press the G key, select this. There. Now when we move it, okay, so we're really getting a lot of distortion in here, but we cleaned up in here a little bit. Okay, so let's fix this up. Yeah, that's not too bad. Not too bad at all. That's still pretty gnarly, but that's okay for now. I think we're kind of unbalanced here. Let's just weld a little bit more. Try to pull these polygons in. And we'll jump back to the 3D room and check our work. So there's the distortion under the nose and the tip of the nose and where we're currently working. But not too bad on the around that edge there. So I'm going to pause the video again and try to bring this up a little bit further and probably stop somewhere around here, and we'll leave this cut seam along here. Again, this would be covered by hair, so distortion up here isn't going to be a big problem. But it all depends on your specific needs and what you're going to do with this mesh. If you're not going to have hair, maybe you're going to edit it in some way, and you might need to have a better, cleaner UV layout up here. But that's all up to you. But so far so good. Again, this is actually coming along a lot more cleanly this time, so we'll see what happens after a few more minutes of some offline editing. So I spent a little bit more time on this, and you can see I've managed to clean up the weld and extend it further up the middle of the face. I'm finding that at about this point here, if we go much further, the distortions become almost uncorrectable. So I'm going to hold it there. So there's some blue distortion right at the edge of this cut here. We're pretty much just going to have to accept that as is. Again, this part of the head should be covered by hair. I took the liberty of re-welding the nostrils back into place. So that came out pretty nicely. We've still got some distortion around the nose, on the tip of the nose here. And I also came in and fixed this up. And it looks like it's actually distorted on me again. But using the Control middle mouse button and Control Shift middle mouse button, I just adjusted these and cleaned them up so they weren't overlapping. I won't repeat that here. But I did that on both corners. This one's still good. And the other thing I tried, in addition to earlier, we selected the bottom portion of the neck here and kind of pushed it upward to try to reduce the distortion around the ears. I did the same thing but using the top portion of the head, so just above the seam here. That was somewhere around this part of the mesh. And I tried to pull things down and correct the distortion that way, and I think that came out pretty good. I mentioned before that this unwrap is much cleaner than the unwrap when I was experimenting earlier. So with just a little bit more cleaning up, a little bit more care, we can probably find ways to fix up the rest of this distortion. But all in all, this is pretty good. So let's jump over to the 3D view and take a look at our handiwork here. So the only areas that are really concerning to me, since 3D renders often come in close on the face and focus on the eyes, is we should probably try to clean this up a little bit more. And I think the chin got a little bit worse when we pulled the rest of the neck up. So we might want to fix that as well. So if you can't fix these areas by using the flattening brush, UV Layout has a couple other tricks, and that is the 4 and the 5 key. And they create brushes, and I'll just tap the 4 key here just up above the eye. And you can see that those arrows, blue arrows, were pointing outward. So that means the brush is actually going to start expanding these polygons. So in effect, we're painting distortion in here. If I press the 5 key, as you might expect, the arrows are pointing in. And so they're actually shrinking the size of the polygons in that area. So by painting distortion, we can try to clean up some of this area here. So red is smaller than it should be. So we want to use the 4 key and just kind of paint in there a little bit. And you can see the sort of a blue comes in, and it's a lot greener in this area than it was. So let's just paint a little bit more just in here. Now it's starting to mess things up a little bit and twist some of these edge loops. So we'll come in with the flattening brush and try to clean that up. So it's something you have to use very judiciously and very carefully. And in certain situations like this here, you can see it's actually getting a little bit worse. So just approach with the flattening brush very slowly. I was going a little too fast there, I think. And just be patient with this. And then it may also come down to manually editing. So this region in here along the edge of the eye, not sure. Oh, see there, I pressed the B key and I think it messed it up a little bit more. Let's see, no, it's keeping the... Yeah, see, it's trying to make these polygons smaller. So we're actually cleaning up the bottom of the eye fairly well. But I may have messed this up here. But hopefully you get the idea. So the 4 and the 5 key can be pretty useful for additional cleaning up. So we can use that on the tip of the nose here. Just a little bit. There, see, it's starting to affect the edge loops. So let's use the flattening brush. Oh, that's not good. Okay, that'll probably have to be manually cleaned up. And we'll use the 5 key along here and along here. And the flattening brush again. So again, with a little extra care, and I've gone and I've messed it up unfortunately, but with frequent saves and just taking your time, you can clean up an awful lot of distortion that way as well. So with that, I am going to end this video. It's one of my longest yet. I will probably clean this up manually offline, and then we will have one more video where we take another look at packing all of this together. There's a few more tricks that I want to talk about. The issue in the very first video was that the face did not have a lot of UV real estate in the Make Human mesh. It was blended in with the rest of the body, and the arms and legs were all attached to the body, so everything was in one UV tile. And so my goal here has been to create 3 UV tiles and actually have these UV islands have a lot greater real estate in each tile and a lot greater detail in their texture maps. So I will explain that in a 4th video. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you found this interesting and useful.